The world hailed Lee Chaolan as a modern-day Da Vinci. His mind, a crucible of innovation, birthed marvels that redefined human existence. From self-sustaining arcologies that touched the clouds to medical nanobots that cured the incurable, Lee's company, Violet Systems, was the engine of a new golden age. He stood at the pinnacle, a titan of progress, celebrated and revered. But in the quiet moments, a shadow crept into his heart. He saw his creations, meant to heal and uplift, twisted into instruments of power and control. His agricultural drones, designed to end famine, were repurposed for surveillance. His clean energy breakthroughs were hoarded by nations, sparking new resource wars. The very tools he built to unite humanity were being used to tear it apart. One rain-slicked evening, standing before a holographic display of his life's work, the weight of it all crashed down. The screen flickered with news reports, border skirmishes using his kinetic barriers, political dissidents silenced by his communication jammers. Each headline was a dagger. He wasn't building a better future. He was arming a more sophisticated conflict. The reflection staring back at him was not a savior, but a merchant of elegantly packaged destruction. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the sorrow of the world, Lee made a decision. He initiated a single command, and across the globe, the vibrant purple logos of Violet Systems went dark. The company was dissolved. Its patents were released into the public domain, a final, desperate gift. And Lee Chaolan, the man who had reshaped the world, simply vanished. He retreated to a secluded, forgotten corner of the planet, a place untouched by the relentless march of technology he had spearheaded. He built a simple life, finding solace in the rhythm of the tides and the silent wisdom of the mountains. He traded circuit boards for garden tools, algorithms for the simple logic of nature. The world, initially thrown into chaos by the sudden void left by Violet Systems, eventually adapted. They reverse-engineered his tech, but without his guiding vision, progress stagnated. His name faded from a headline into a history lesson, a myth whispered among a new generation. For Lee, these years of exile were a quiet atonement. He learned that the silence held more answers than the constant hum of a supercomputer. He was at peace. Then, the sky fell. The Aegis network, the global defense system humanity had cobbled together from the scraps of his old designs, suffered a catastrophic, cascading failure. A solar flare, larger than any ever recorded, was hurtling towards Earth. Without Aegis, civilization's entire electronic nervous system would be fried. Extinction wasn't a possibility. It was a mathematical certainty. Panic gripped the planet. In their desperation, world leaders remembered the ghost. They found him, an older, weathered man, his hands calloused from soil, not from a keyboard. They pleaded, they begged, they offered him power, wealth, anything he wanted. Lee looked into their terrified eyes and saw the same old story playing out. Humanity, on the brink, looking for a quick fix, a technological messiah. He refused. He had sworn an oath to himself, an oath of non-creation. He would not forge another sword, no matter how noble the cause. But as days turned into hours, and the solar flare loomed larger in the sky, a young scientist, her face streaked with tears of frustration and fear, confronted him. She didn't beg. She accused. "Your genius isn't yours to hoard," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You brought us to this new world. You don't get to abandon us in it, just because you retired of your own shadow." Her words struck a chord deep within him, not of guilt, but of responsibility. He realized his exile wasn't penance. It was a different kind of arrogance. True wisdom wasn't just about refusing to create. It was about knowing when creation is the only moral choice. Lee returned to a world he no longer recognized. He was taken to a secret bunker, a relic of a bygone era, filled with the best and brightest minds left. The air was thick with despair. He walked to the central console, the dust motes dancing in the projector light. For a moment, he felt the old thrill, the familiar spark of a problem waiting to be solved. But this time, it was different. This wasn't about pushing boundaries or achieving the impossible. This was about saving lives. He laid out his plan. He wouldn't build a new Aegis. He would build its opposite, a temporary, self-sacrificial system. He called it Ephemera. For 72 frantic hours, Lee didn't sleep. He became a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of code and engineering. He guided the young scientists, his hands moving with a grace that defied his years. He wasn't the distant icon they had read about. He was a teacher, a mentor, his calm presence a bulwark against their rising fear. He explained every line of code, not just its function, but its philosophy. Ephemera was designed to be a single-use shield. It would absorb the full impact of the solar flare, rerouting its energy into a harmless, distributed pattern across the globe. But the core of its design was a paradox. The very act of saving the world would be the act of its own complete and total erasure. Every line of code, every schematic, every trace of its existence would be wiped clean by the energy it dissipated. It was a solution that could never be studied, replicated, or weaponized. It was a perfect, fleeting answer. As the final hour approached, the world held its breath. Lee stood back from the console, his work done. The young scientist who had challenged him stood beside him. "It's beautiful," she whispered, looking at the elegant, cascading code. "It's just a tool," Lee replied softly, his eyes on the countdown timer. "And its greatest feature is that it will cease to be one." The flare hit on screens across the bunker. They watched as Ephemera flared to life, a magnificent, planet-wide aurora. It was a silent, beautiful defense. The system held, the energy dissipated, and then, just as designed, it vanished. The bunker's systems rebooted, showing a clear, safe Earth. A wave of cheers and relieved sobs erupted. They had survived. In the midst of the celebration, Lee Chaolan quietly slipped away. He left behind no notes, no final words. He simply walked out of the bunker and back into the world he had just saved. He returned to his simple life, not as an exile, but as a man who had finally understood his place. He had learned the ultimate lesson of his genius. It wasn't about the power to create, but the wisdom to know when to let go. True mastery lies not in building things that last forever, but in knowing when the most powerful creation is the one that chooses not to exist. The world would rebuild, and this time, perhaps, they would do it with a little more wisdom, having been saved by a miracle they could never possess. Thanks for watching.